This video provides an example of how one might begin to develop a project working across the data set. So a kind of thematic type of analysis, though not necessarily following a tight thematic analysis pattern such as that suggested by Brown and Clark. We have another video in this series that looks specifically at Brown and Clark's approach. So very often we'll be doing a mixture of emergent analysis, where we start perhaps by looking at a folder and start just to coding those texts, those extracts that appear to jump out at us. We might not know at that stage what to call the code, so we might start by coding NVivo. So NVivo coding, when the name of the code is the actual extract, the exact same words as the extract. And then from that, we might look more closely and be able to come up with a number of small codes. Often this may be many, 50, 60, 100 very small codes. It's very descriptive and stays very close to the text. So we'll work through the text and identify such codes as we go. And then comes a stage of reviewing the coding and those coding frameworks to see, well, can some be merged? Do some relate to others? You know, can we organize them in a better way? Do we need all of them? You know, can we find other terms where we can capture more so they're not so small and we begin to get a smaller coding set framework that we can work with? So this can be an iterative process, and we can then work on that and develop the themes. And you might do that starting from scratch when it would be a complete emergent approach. But very often we will already have a starting point. So we might have arrived already having a good idea about what we want to find, what we want to look at, and knowing that there will be certain codes that we will use. We may even have a well-established framework that we're going to test out, and we'll make a series of codes before we go to the data, which would be more of a deductive type of approach. But very often it's a mixture of both, at least to begin with, as we work through and develop a framework that seems more stable that we can then test out. So the deductive approach, you've already got your framework, and if you are testing an established framework on your particular data set, your particular case, you may then find an outcome is an amendment to that framework. So it's two different but both important approaches. So I'll now go into an NVivo project. So what I've got here are some deductive codes. Now, if my interest in the analysis is to understand the professional identities and the change in professional identities across the academic career, then I might already come in knowing that I'm going to have some codes. And in this case, I'm aware that sometimes in the interviews, they're talking about their past experience, sometimes their present experience, and sometimes their expectations for the future. So I might need to have some time codes. So I'm able to identify, are they talking about their past, their present, their future? Similarly, are they talking about their early career, their mid-career, their late career? Might be important if I want to track change and how that relates to their professional identity. There may be other identities involved. So this is a very simple example. I've just pulled that together for illustrative purposes. Now, the coding, the auto-coding themes are useful. That's a type of content analysis, type of qualitative content analysis. And that can give us a head start because it's helped us to gain a huge insight into the overview of the data set. So I'd want to use this in some way to help me in the development of my more emergent coding framework. So the first thing I'd do is to look through carefully and see, well, how have each of the terms been used? Even this one, bit, let's see how these terms have been used and how they've been grouped. There's lots on career, different ways of looking at career. So I'd go through this, and then as identity, okay, that's quite interesting to me. So identity has been talked about in those terms. So I might want to take that and add that to my framework. Now I can go through and I can select certain codes because I know that everything in that whole data set that relates to these codes has been collected and has been grouped. And so that can give me a quick start as I develop more emergent codes. And if I am going to do that and start to use codes in this, I'd say a quick way, but quick shouldn't be taken as a rough and ready way. It's actually exact because it's taken every single account across the data set. So it has been exhaustive, which is one of the features that we would be looking for in a good qualitative analysis. And I do need to make sure that my overall framework remains exhaustive. So what I would do in practical terms is to make a copy of this. So let's copy that folder and paste it. So I'm going to have another folder will emerge. We've got two here. So remember, all the time we want to keep the process and be able to track the process of analysis. So I don't want to mess around with those auto-coded things and lose them. I want them to be there on record. So we have them on record. And now I might change that name. What should we call it? Get into there. Let's give it another name. So I might call it iteration. Something like that. So I'm just know what's going on here. So I might then work with that and be able to cut and copy from here into what I'm going to call emergent codes. So I want to develop a coding framework, but taking from what I can here. What have I learnt? And I've actually learned quite a lot. I've learned around the identity, different kinds of identity, but I've also learned about the social project and the purpose. So that was something that was unexpected to me. So I might take that and copy those codes in. So let's do that. I could cut, but I will copy. So I might end up not messing around with this too much, but I want to feel free to do what I want to do. I might want to try merging codes, etc. And I'm not going to go into all the detail here, but you can have a play around with this and be free to cut around with it. You can always get rid of it and start again because you've got those auto-coded themes already there, safely stored. Okay, so I'm going to put it into here. It will be recorded that these are auto codes. Okay, I could do the same with the identity codes here. But it does need to remain an exhaustive analysis. So it is important that we don't miss out on coding. So what I would do, I'd work with the auto code. I might pull quite a lot in, but the more you pull in, that seems very relevant, gives you it makes you feel that you're on the right track. At least you're getting somewhere. Because now we've got to really think with our research question in our head. So we want to be coding the data now in relation. Now, how does that relate to our research question? So I'd go back to our transcripts. And now this is where we would manually code. Okay, so I'd be going through here. One thing I might do is just go through and take, now let's take this little one for now, but I might take all my annotations and this time code them in Vivo. Because my annotations were the things that had caught my mind in the first place. So I've gone through the data set in an exhaustive way, because I've gone through and read everything before. And so we know the status of these are codes that have caught my interest. No more, no less than that. So I'd go through, do that. But I'd also be going through and reading again. And I might find things that, yeah, perhaps I'd missed the first time. Something that's now jumped out at me that I hadn't seen before. So this is quite interesting, talking about enjoying teaching. So that's really to do with identity, but it's also to do with the past. So I'm going to code this and make a new code, small code. We're at the small code stage. And what should I call it? Well, let's just call it under emergent codes there, new code, enjoying teaching. Now, at the same time, we've got these deductive codes. So I need to go through very carefully the whole data set. And I'm going to code that also into these deductive codes that I have. You don't have to have them separate, the deductive and the inductive, the emergent codes. It's more or less so that you can see the difference. So it's more for that purposes. So that's talking about early career. Okay. I can multiply code. It is talking about a professional identity. And there's a lot on that. So let's take that statement again. Because it's also talking about other identities there. And talking about using the gym and weights and things like that. So I might code that other identity. but I'm quite interested in identity. And when I see the word enjoy, that's something that I feel sensitive towards. See that as being theoretically sensitive in terms of understanding, perhaps identification with certain aspects, and it's about enjoying teaching. So perhaps I realise I need a new code. So just for our purposes, I'm going to put it under here, under Emergent Codes, new code, enjoy. And this is going to take a while because this stage, we go through the data set. As we go through the data set, we're going to get to a point where there are many, many codes. And it will take a long while, but we know we've been exhaustive. And there may be other things I code for, because as well as being exhaustive, i.e., we're not going to leave out data from analysis. That doesn't mean that every single piece of data is coded. But as we're going through in a systematic way, perhaps several times through the data set, we're going to make sure that we don't ignore that text. If it's not coded, it's because it shouldn't be coded, not because we've not bothered to look at that page. So that's the difference there. But I'm also interested in anything that is very different. And the sentiment analysis from the autocoding, quite useful there. And that's a way of seeing, well, how perhaps is one of the interviewees, are they different? You know, is anyone standing out as different? And some codes may be utilised and really relate to one or two particular interviews. Okay, and that's something to bear in mind. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be there and shouldn't be coded. So I'd work in this way, and then having made a whole long list of themes, of little codes, I'd start to develop them into themes. Now, there's a really good example in the following video that particularly stays closer to Brown and Clark's approach. So in this video, I'm really just showing that messiness. And there can be a messy stage of things not being purely inductive or purely inductive, you know, or emergent. And that's very typical. And that's probably where analysts are with most projects. That kind of more messy stage rather than the purist approach. And again, it's not that you have to follow this, you don't have to follow this away. I want to put it there so you can see different ways that people might work with the data. Now, the main thing here is if we have auto-coded, it might be you use that and you're just working with that auto-code. But given you have to give an interpretation and go beyond the description there in some way, it's quite often a good idea to draw on the auto-coding, but also to add to it. So I hope you'll found this to be a helpful, useful video.